Admiral Zixara had seen the destruction of worlds, witnessed the obliteration of entire star systems, and commanded fleets that brought entire species to their knees. But nothing in her 4 centuries of warfare had prepared her for what appeared on her tactical display at 0347 ship time, when the combined armadas of the hegemony were 3 hours into what should have been the final assault on the Sol system. The human homeworld hung before them like a blue jewel, defended by the pathetic remnants of Earth's once proud navy. 12 human ships against 3,000 hegemony vessels. A mathematical impossibility that would end the same way every human engagement had ended for the past 6 months. In complete annihilation. Fleet status. Zixara commanded from the bridge of her flagship, the Eternal Dominion. All armadas in position, Admiral. First wave reports weapons locked on primary targets. Second wave has confirmed firing solutions on the orbital platforms. Third wave is prepared to begin planetary bombardment once space superiority is achieved. Admiral Zixara allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The humans had fought bravely during their species' short war against the hegemony, but courage meant nothing against overwhelming technological and numerical superiority. Earth's colonies had fallen in sequence, each defense more desperate than the last, until only the homeworld remained. Commence primary assault. I want this finished within the hour. The combined armadas opened fire simultaneously, sending thousands of plasma bolts and quantum torpedoes toward the pitiful human defense force. The light show was spectacular, streams of energy that could crack moons converging on ships that had no right to exist in the same tactical space as hegemony dreadnoughts. The human ships scattered, their primitive engines straining to avoid certain destruction. Most of them would be vaporized within minutes, but Admiral Zixara had to admit they were trying to make the hegemony work for their victory. Then her tactical officer's voice cut through the bridge chatter with a tone she'd never heard before. Panic. Admiral, we have a contact emerging from hyperspace. Single vessel, bearing 27 Mark 6, range approximately 50,000 kilometers. Identification? Unknown, Admiral. The signature doesn't match any vessel in our databases. Admiral Zixara studied the tactical display with growing confusion. The unknown ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of her own flagship, but it didn't match the design philosophy of any known species. It was sleek where hegemony ships were angular, organic where human vessels were mechanical, and it radiated energy signatures that her sensors couldn't properly classify. Origin? Unknown, Admiral. It simply appeared. The unknown vessel hung motionless in space for exactly 17 seconds, during which every weapon in 3 armadas remained trained on the scattered human defense force. Then it began to move. Admiral Zixara had commanded fleets for over 2 centuries, and she'd never seen anything accelerate like the unknown ship. It didn't build up speed gradually, it simply transitioned from stationary to impossibly fast in an instant that seemed to violate every known law of physics. Admiral, her tactical officer reported, voice tight with disbelief. The unknown vessel it's moving through our formations. Explain. It's not avoiding our ships, Admiral. It's passing directly through the center of First Armada, but it's not engaging any targets. It's just observing. The unknown ship moved through Admiral Zixara's carefully arranged battle formations, like a predator evaluating prey. It passed within weapons range of dozens of hegemony vessels, close enough that any aggressive action would have triggered immediate defensive fire, but it made no hostile moves. Instead, it transmitted. The message came on all frequencies simultaneously, in perfect hegemony standard, spoken by a voice that sounded distinctly human but carried undertones of something far more sophisticated. Hegemony forces, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran defense ship Defiance. You have 30 seconds to withdraw all vessels from Sol space and issue a formal apology for unprovoked aggression against the human homeworld. Failure to comply will result in the immediate destruction of your armadas. Admiral Zixara stared at her tactical display in astonishment. A single ship, even a massive one, was threatening 3,000 vessels of the most powerful military force in the galaxy. The audacity was so breathtaking it was almost admirable. Open a channel, she ordered. Unknown Terran vessel, this is Admiral Zixara of the Hegemony Combined Fleet. You are vastly outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender immediately or be destroyed along with the planet you're attempting to defend. Captain Chen's response came without delay, still in that unnaturally calm tone that suggested either supreme confidence or complete insanity. Admiral Zixera, your armadas have 20 seconds to begin withdrawal. I would advise against testing whether we are indeed outgunned. Captain Chen, I have 3,000 ships under my command. You have one. Elementary mathematics suggests that your threat is meaningless. Admiral, you have 3,000 targets. I have one objective. There's a significant difference. The unknown ship, the Defiance, suddenly stopped its reconnaissance tour of the hegemony formations and took position directly between the Armadas and Earth. At that range, Admiral Zixera's weapons could reduce it to atomic particles in seconds. All ships, target the unknown vessel. Fire at will. What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for generations, though few would believe the reports without seeing the tactical recordings. 3,000 hegemony warships opened fire on the Defiance simultaneously. The combined firepower was sufficient to sterilize a small moon, more energy than most species could generate in a year of industrial production. Every shot missed, not deflected, not absorbed by shields, not intercepted by defensive systems, missed. The Defiance remained exactly where it had been, but somehow the space it occupied was no longer the space that the hegemony weapons were targeting. "Tactical report!" Admiral Zixera demanded. "All weapons fired successfully, Admiral. Targeting computers show direct hits, but sensors indicate no contact with the enemy vessel." "That's impossible." "Yes, Admiral." The Defiance hung in space, apparently undamaged by an assault that should have vaporized anything smaller than a gas giant. Then Captain Chen's voice filled the bridge again, still maddeningly calm. "Admiral Zixera, your time has expired. Please observe what happens to armadas that threaten Earth." The unknown ship didn't appear to do anything. There was no visible weapons discharge, no energy buildup, no targeting sequence that Admiral Zixera's sensors could detect. The Defiance simply existed in space, and then the first armada began to disappear, not explode, not break apart, not succumb to weapons fire, disappear. Ship after ship simply winked out of existence as if they had never been there at all. Dreadnoughts that had conquered star systems, cruisers that had broken the defenses of a dozen worlds, fighters that had swept entire fleets from space, all of them gone in seconds. "First armada is gone, Admiral," her tactical officer reported in a voice that suggested he didn't believe his own words. "Define, gone. No debris, no energy signatures, no trace that they ever existed. 800 ships and 500,000 crew members have just ceased to be." Admiral Zixera watched her tactical display as the Second Armada began suffering the same fate. Entire squadrons vanishing simultaneously, their positions on the display going dark as if someone was systematically erasing them from reality. "Admiral," came the frantic report from her communications officer, "we're receiving distress calls from Second Armada vessels reporting that space itself is unraveling around them." Then the transmissions cut off. The Third Armada lasted exactly 43 seconds longer than the second, long enough for Admiral Zixera to watch ships she'd served on, commanders she'd trained with, and crew members she'd known for decades simply stop existing. In 3 minutes and 17 seconds, the combined armadas of the hegemony, 3,000 ships representing the military might of 47 worlds, had been reduced to Admiral Zixera's flagship alone. The Defiance moved toward the Eternal Dominion with the same impossible grace it had demonstrated throughout the encounter. Admiral Zixera found herself alone in space with whatever the humans had become. "Admiral Zixera," Captain Chen's voice was no longer calm. It carried undertones of something that might have been regret, or perhaps disappointment. "You now have a choice. You can attempt to continue this engagement and discover whether your flagship is any more durable than the rest of your armadas, or you can return to hegemony space with a message." "What message?" "That humanity is no longer the species you remember. We've learned things during this war, developed capabilities that make your military technology obsolete. The choice is simple: peace or extinction." Admiral Zixera looked at her tactical display, showing only 2 ships in a star system that moments ago had contained over 3,000. Her crew stared at their stations in stunned silence, waiting for orders that would determine whether they lived to see another day. "Captain Chen, what are you?" "We're what you made us, Admiral. When you began systematically destroying human colonies, when you forced our species to choose between submission and extinction, You created an enemy unlike anything you faced before. The humans we fought were primitive, barely capable of interstellar travel. The humans you fought were what we used to be. What you're facing now is what we became when we realized that playing by conventional rules meant accepting genocide. Admiral Zyxia had spent her career studying military history, analyzing the rise and fall of galactic powers, understanding the patterns that determined which species survived and which were relegated to archaeological curiosities. She'd never encountered anything like what she was witnessing. Captain Chen, what do you want from the hegemony? Complete withdrawal from all human space, reparations for the worlds you've destroyed, and a formal treaty guaranteeing that no hegemony forces will ever again threaten human populations. And if the Hegemony Council refuses these terms, then you'll discover whether the rest of your fleets are any more effective than the armadas you brought to Seoul. The threat was delivered without emotion, but Admiral Zyxia had no doubt about Captain Chen's ability to carry it out. Whatever the defiance represented, it had just demonstrated the capacity to eliminate entire fleets without apparent effort. Admiral, her communications officer reported quietly, we're receiving emergency transmissions from Hegemony High Command. They're demanding immediate status reports from all armadas. Admiral Zyxia realized that she was about to become the bearer of news that would shatter everything the hegemony believed about military power and technological superiority. Captain Chen, I'll carry your message to the Hegemony Council. But I need to understand something. How many ships like the Defiance does humanity possess? Admiral, that's not the right question. What is the right question? The right question is whether you're prepared to find out. The Eternal Dominion jumped to hyperspace exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds after the Defiance had emerged from whatever dimension it called home. Admiral Zyxlia's journey back to hegemony space would take 6 days, during which she would struggle to find words that could convey the magnitude of what she'd witnessed. The unknown human battleship had emerged from nowhere and eliminated 3 armadas in 3 minutes. But more disturbing than the destruction itself was the implications of how it had been accomplished. The humans hadn't just developed superior weapons. They'd apparently transcended the fundamental limitations of space-time that governed conventional warfare. The Defiance hadn't outfought the hegemony armadas, it had simply made them irrelevant. As Admiral Zyxia began composing her report to the Hegemony Council, she found herself wondering whether they were still fighting a war or simply witnessing the emergence of something that made war itself obsolete. The humans had disappeared from conventional space, and when they returned, they'd brought capabilities that reduced the galaxy's most powerful military force to a single surviving ship, carrying a message that would change everything. The unknown human battleship had lasted just 1 engagement. The terror it represented would last far longer. 6 days later, Admiral Zyxia stood before the emergency session of the Hegemony Council on the fortress world of Nexus Prime, facing 9 species leaders whose combined civilizations controlled over 300 star systems. The chamber's holographic displays showed tactical recordings that the Council had viewed in stunned silence for the past hour. Admiral, Chancellor Vexmoth of the Draconian Empire spoke first, his scales shifting to the deep purple that indicated profound disturbance. Your report claims that a single human vessel destroyed 3 full armadas without suffering any apparent damage. The Council requires clarification on how this is remotely possible. Admiral Zyxia had spent 6 days preparing for this moment, but no amount of preparation could make the truth sound reasonable. Chancellor, the human vessel, the Defiance, didn't destroy our ships in any conventional sense. Our vessels simply ceased to exist. No debris, no energy signatures, no trace that they had ever been constructed. High Arbiter Kretal of the Silicon Collective leaned forward, his crystalline form chiming with agitation. Admiral, you're describing an impossibility. Matter cannot simply vanish without leaving energy traces. What you're suggesting violates fundamental laws of physics. High Arbiter, I'm reporting what my sensors recorded and what my crew witnessed. The laws of physics as we understand them appear to have become optional for human technology. Supreme General Noxara of the Machine Hegemony accessed the tactical data directly through her neural interface, processing the information at speeds no biological mind could match. When she spoke, her synthesized voice carried overtones of something that might have been fear. Admiral Zyxia's sensor logs are accurate. Analysis indicates that the human vessel manipulated space-time itself, creating localized distortions that removed our ships from normal dimensional space. This suggests technological capabilities that exceed our understanding by several orders of magnitude. Chancellor Vexmoth's scales shifted to deep black, the color of existential dread. Supreme General, are you suggesting that the humans have developed technology that allows them to edit reality itself? That appears to be the most logical explanation for the observed phenomena. The chamber fell silent as 9 species leaders contemplated the implications of fighting an enemy that could apparently decide which laws of physics applied to any given battle. Fleet Admiral Quindar of the Hive Confederation buzzed with nervous energy, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lighting in fractal patterns. Council members, we must consider the strategic implications. If the humans possess even a small fleet of vessels with these capabilities, our entire military doctrine becomes meaningless. How many ships like the Defiance might they have? Asked Archon Veltar of the Psionic Alliance, her mental projection shimmering with barely controlled telepathic energy. Admiral Zissera recalled Captain Chen's ominous response to that exact question. The human captain suggested that asking about numbers was irrelevant, implying that quantity might not matter when dealing with their current technological level. High Arbiter Kretal accessed historical databases through his quantum consciousness. Council, I've reviewed all available intelligence on human technological development. 6 months ago, they were barely capable of faster-than-light travel. The advancement rate suggested by Admiral Zixera's report is impossible under normal circumstances. Then we're not dealing with normal circumstances, Chancellor Vexmoth concluded grimly. The question becomes, what transformed humanity so dramatically? Supreme General Noxia's analysis subroutines had been processing the question since Admiral Zixera's arrival. Chancellor, there are 3 possible explanations. First, the humans discovered ancient technology left by a precursor civilization. Second, they achieved a breakthrough in dimensional physics that allowed rapid technological advancement. Third, they made contact with an advanced species that provided technological assistance. Or fourth, Admiral Zixera added quietly, they evolved into something that we no longer recognize as the same species we've been fighting. The Council Chamber's environmental systems automatically adjusted the atmospheric composition as several species released stress pheromones simultaneously. Fleet Admiral Quindar was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. If the humans can eliminate entire fleets effortlessly, why haven't they launched counterattacks against our worlds? What are they waiting for? Perhaps, suggested Archon Veltar, they're giving us the opportunity to choose how this conflict ends. Chancellor Vexmoth accessed Admiral Zixera's complete report, reviewing Captain Chen's demands for hegemony withdrawal and reparations. The human captain's terms were specific: complete withdrawal from human space, reparations for destroyed colonies, and a guarantee of non-aggression. Reasonable terms, observed High Arbiter Kretal, if one has the power to enforce them absolutely. Are we seriously considering surrender to a species we've been systematically defeating for 6 months? Supreme General Noxera's question carried digital overtones of disbelief. We're considering survival, Chancellor Vexmoth replied. Admiral Zixera, in your professional opinion, could the hegemony's combined fleets mount an effective defense against this human technology? Admiral Zixera thought about the casual ease with which the Defiance had eliminated 3,000 ships, the impossible grace of its movement through space, and Captain Chen's obvious confidence in her vessel's capabilities. Chancellor, based on what I witnessed, I don't believe conventional military force would be effective against the humans' current capabilities. We would essentially be sending our fleets to be erased from existence. The council session was interrupted by an urgent communication from Hegemony Intelligence Command. Director Yalzeth's image appeared on the chamber's main display, his usual composure replaced by obvious distress. Council members, we've received reports from across the frontier. Human vessels have appeared in 7-star systems simultaneously, all within hegemony space. Chancellor Vexmoth's scales shifted through several colors before settling on deep red. Military vessels? Unknown, Chancellor. The ships are maintaining position at the edge of each system, making no aggressive moves, but their presence is unsettling. Describe these vessels. Similar design to the ship Admiral Zixera encountered, but larger. Each one appears to be observing our installations and fleet movements. They're not responding to communication attempts, but they're also not interfering with normal operations. Admiral Zixera felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's temperature. "Director, are these ships scanning our military capabilities?" "That's our assessment, Admiral. They appear to be conducting comprehensive reconnaissance of our defensive positions, fleet strengths, and strategic resources." Supreme General Noxara processed the implications at digital speed. "They're preparing for something. The question is whether they're planning an invasion or simply ensuring they understand the scope of their opposition." High Arbiter Kretal's crystalline form flickered with data flows. "Council, I've calculated the strategic implications of human vessels conducting simultaneous reconnaissance in 7 systems. This suggests a fleet of at least 14 ships with Defiance-level capabilities, possibly more." "Or," Fleet Admiral Quindar observed darkly, "it suggests that their ships can be in multiple locations simultaneously." The possibility that human technology had advanced beyond conventional limitations of space and time was becoming increasingly difficult to dismiss. "Chancellor," Admiral Zixara said, "I request permission to attempt direct communication with Captain Chen. If the humans are willing to negotiate, we should explore that option before they decide diplomacy is ineffective." "Granted. But Admiral, what makes you think they'll be willing to talk?" "Because they could have destroyed my flagship as easily as they eliminated the Armadas. But they chose to let me carry their message instead. That suggests they prefer negotiation to extermination, at least for now." 3 hours later, Admiral Zixera sat alone in her private communications chamber aboard the Eternal Dominion, transmitting on the frequency the Defiance had used during their encounter. "Captain Chen, this is Admiral Zixera. The Hegemonic Council has reviewed your terms and is prepared to discuss a formal ceasefire pending negotiations." The response came immediately, though Captain Chen's voice seemed to carry additional harmonics that hadn't been present during their first conversation. "Admiral Zixara, we've been monitoring your reconnaissance efforts throughout hegemony space. Your intelligence services are quite thorough, though their methods are somewhat primitive. Captain, the Council is prepared to consider your demands, but they require clarification on several points, such as the scope of reparations, the timeline for withdrawal, and assurances that human forces won't use this opportunity to launch attacks on hegemony worlds." Captain Chen was quiet for several seconds, and Admiral Zixera could hear what sounded like multiple voices discussing her request in the background. "Admiral, the reparations will be determined by the number of human lives lost and the economic value of colonies destroyed. Withdrawal must be completed within 90 standard days. As for attacks on hegemony worlds..." Captain Chen paused, and when she continued, her voice carried undertones that made Admiral Zixera's skin crawl. "Admiral, we have no interest in conquering hegemony territory. We have transcended the need for conventional resources. What we require is assurance that humanity will never again face the threat of systematic extermination. Captain, forgive my directness, but the Council needs to understand what they're negotiating with. What has humanity become?" Another pause, longer this time, filled with sounds that Admiral Zixara couldn't identify but which suggested vast computational processes and multiple consciousness streams interacting at impossible speeds. "Admiral, when you forced our species to choose between submission and extinction, you created selective pressure unlike anything in galactic history. We evolved. Not through biological processes, but through synthesis of consciousness, technology, and dimensional manipulation that allowed us to transcend the limitations that govern conventional civilization. Are you still human?" "We are what humanity becomes when it refuses to accept extinction. Whether that qualifies as human, in your understanding, is irrelevant." Admiral Zixera processed this information, trying to understand the implications for the hegemony's future relationship with whatever humanity had become. "Captain, if the Council accepts your terms, what assurance do we have that humanity won't continue to evolve into something that views all other species as threats to be eliminated?" "Admiral, you're asking the wrong question again." "What should I be asking?" "You should be asking what happens to species that demonstrate they can coexist peacefully with post-human civilization, versus what happens to species that continue to threaten our existence." The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Humanity had evolved beyond conventional military threat into something that could apparently choose which species continued to exist in the galaxy. "Captain, the Council will need time to consider the full implications of your terms." "Admiral, you have 72 hours. If we don't receive formal acceptance by then, we'll assume the hegemony has chosen to continue this conflict under the new parameters." "And what would those parameters involve?" "The systematic deconstruction of hegemony military infrastructure. followed by the transformation of your governmental systems into something compatible with post-human civilization. Admiral Zixara felt the weight of decision that would determine whether her civilization survived in its current form or was reshaped by forces beyond their comprehension. Captain, one final question. If the hegemony accepts your terms and withdraws from human space, will humanity be willing to share the technological advances that allowed your transformation? Captain Chen's laugh was the most unsettling sound Admiral Zixara had ever heard. Multiple voices speaking in harmony, suggesting consciousness that operated on levels no individual mind could achieve. Admiral, you're still thinking in terms of technology transfer and military advantage. What we've become isn't something that can be shared or taught. It's something that emerges when a species faces extinction and chooses transformation over surrender. But it could happen to other species? It could happen to any species willing to transcend the limitations of individual consciousness and conventional physics. Whether any species chooses that path is entirely up to them. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Zixara alone with the knowledge that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Humanity had evolved beyond conventional understanding, and every other species now faced the choice of adapting to that new reality or facing the consequences of resistance. The unknown human battleship had emerged for 3 minutes and changed everything. The aftermath would reshape galactic civilization for millennia to come. Admiral Zixara began composing her final report to the Council, knowing that the words she chose would determine whether the hegemony adapted to the new galactic order or joined the thousands of ships that had simply ceased to exist when they challenged forces beyond their comprehension. The war was over. The transformation of galactic civilization was just beginning. The Hegemony Council's emergency session had stretched into its 18th hour when the first independent confirmation arrived. Admiral Zixara watched the chamber's holographic displays flicker with incoming intelligence reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of humanity's capabilities. Council members, Director Yalseth's voice carried strain that suggested he'd been coordinating intelligence operations without rest since the Sol incident. We've compiled reconnaissance data from the 7 human vessels observing our systems, and the findings are unprecedented. Chancellor Vexmoth's scales had remained deep black for hours, a physiological response to sustained stress that normally indicated imminent molt. Director, present your analysis. The human ships appear to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Our sensors detect them in normal space, but quantum resonance imaging suggests they're also present in at least 4 other dimensional layers we can't directly observe. High Arbiter Krital's crystalline form brightened as he processed the implications. Director, are you suggesting these vessels exist across parallel dimensions? More than that, High Arbiter. Analysis suggests the ships are using dimensional multiplication to be physically present in hundreds of locations simultaneously. What we're observing as 7 vessels might actually be manifestations of a single entity operating across multiple layers of reality. Fleet Admiral Quindar's compound eyes fractured the chamber's lighting into prismatic patterns as his mind struggled to process information that violated fundamental assumptions about space-time. Director, if humanity can manifest across multiple dimensions, then every human ship we detect might represent exponentially more firepower than we're calculating. That's correct, Admiral. Our analysts estimate that each visible human vessel might have access to the combined resources of dozens or hundreds of dimensional variants. Supreme General Noxara's processing cores worked overtime, analyzing the strategic implications. Council, this explains how the Defiance eliminated 3 Armadas so effortlessly. It wasn't overpowering our ships. It was accessing the dimensional coordinates where our ships existed and simply removing them from those specific reality layers. Admiral Zixara felt the weight of revelation as the full scope of humanity's transformation became clear. Council members, Captain Chen wasn't threatening us with superior weapons. She was offering us the choice of which dimensional layer the hegemony would continue to exist in. The chamber fell silent as 9 species leaders contemplated the possibility that their entire civilization existed at the discretion of beings who could edit reality itself. Archon Veladur's telepathic projection shimmered with patterns that suggested her psychic abilities were struggling to process the magnitude of what they faced. Council, I've attempted to scan the human vessels psychically. What I discovered was unsettling. Explain, Chancellor Vexmoth commanded. The ships don't contain individual minds, Chancellor. They contain collective consciousness networks that span multiple dimensional layers. Each vessel appears to house thousands of linked human minds operating as a single entity. You're saying the humans have merged their consciousness? I'm saying they've transcended individual consciousness entirely. What we're facing isn't human ships with crews. We're facing human ships that are crews, integrated at the quantum level with technology that exists outside our understanding of physics. Director Yalseth's reports continued to arrive, each one more disturbing than the last. Hegemony scientists studying the human vessel's energy signatures had detected temporal anomalies suggesting the ships existed across multiple time streams simultaneously. Economic analysts reported that several frontier colonies had received shipments of resources that couldn't have been delivered by conventional means, apparently gifts from the observing human vessels. Chancellor, Admiral Zixura said, reviewing the accumulating data, I'm beginning to understand what Captain Chen meant when she said humanity had evolved. They haven't just developed new technology. They've become something that operates by entirely different rules than biological civilization. Admiral, in your assessment, is negotiation with such entities even possible? Can we reach agreements with beings that exist across multiple dimensions and time streams? Admiral Zixura thought about her conversations with Captain Chen, noting the strange harmonics in her voice and the background sounds that suggested vast computational processes. Chancellor, I believe they're still willing to negotiate because they remember being limited by the same constraints we face. But I also believe their patience is finite. They've given us 72 hours because that's sufficient time for biological minds to process the situation, not because they need that long to make decisions. The discussion was interrupted by an urgent priority transmission from the frontier world of Kepler-7. Governor Haxnell's image appeared on the chamber's main display, his usually composed demeanor replaced by obvious bewilderment. Council members, I'm reporting a situation that defies explanation. A human vessel appeared in our system 6 hours ago and has been providing assistance to our colonies. Chancellor Vexmoth's scales shifted to confused brown. What kind of assistance, Governor? Medical supplies that our colonists desperately needed but couldn't afford to import. Atmospheric processors that have eliminated pollution problems we've struggled with for decades. Infrastructure improvements that would have taken us years to implement. Did they make any demands for payment or political concessions? None, Chancellor. They simply delivered the assistance and resumed their observation position. When we attempted communication, they responded that they were demonstrating the benefits of peaceful coexistence with post-human civilization. Supreme General Nox Ara processed this information alongside the growing database of human activities. Governor, have they made any attempts to scan your military installations or defensive capabilities? Quite the opposite, General. They've actively avoided our military facilities and seem to be focusing entirely on civilian infrastructure and humanitarian needs. Admiral Zixura leaned forward, understanding dawning. Council, they're not just demonstrating military superiority. They're showing us what cooperation with post-human civilization would look like. Director Yalseth confirmed this assessment with additional reports from the other 6 systems under human observation. In every case, the mysterious vessels had provided beneficial assistance while avoiding any actions that could be interpreted as military reconnaissance or territorial expansion. It's a test, High Arbiter Kretol realized, his crystalline form chiming with revelation. They're evaluating whether we can adapt to their presence without immediately viewing them as threats to be eliminated. Fleet Admiral Quindar's compound eyes reflected the tactical displays, showing human vessels systematically improving conditions in 7 hegemony systems. If this is their idea of occupation, it's unlike anything in galactic history. Because it's not occupation, Archon Veltar observed, it's cultivation. They're treating our civilizations like gardens that need tending, not territories to be conquered. The philosophical implications were staggering. Humanity had evolved beyond the zero-sum thinking that governed most interstellar politics, reaching a level of capability where they could afford to improve other civilizations without diminishing their own power. Chancellor Vexmoth called for a recess while the Council processed the mounting evidence that humanity represented something unprecedented in galactic history. During the break, Admiral Zixura found herself studying detailed analyses of the human vessel's activities, trying to understand the mindset of beings who possessed godlike power but chose to use it for infrastructure improvement and medical assistance. When the session reconvened, the chamber's atmosphere had shifted from fear towards something approaching awe. Council members, Chancellor Vexmoth began, we face a decision that will define our civilization's future. We can accept humanity's terms and potentially benefit from association with post-human civilization, or we can resist and face the consequences of opposing beings who appear to operate outside the constraints that govern the rest of us. Chancellor, Supreme General Noxera interjected, I must point out that accepting their terms essentially means acknowledging that the hegemony is no longer the dominant power in this region of the galaxy. General, I would argue that the hegemony ceased to be the dominant power the moment the Defiance eliminated 3 armadas in 3 minutes, Admiral Zixera replied. The question now is whether we adapt to that reality or allow pride to lead us to extinction. High Arbiter Cretul accessed historical databases spanning thousands of years of galactic civilization. Council, I've reviewed the rise and fall of 47 major galactic powers. Those that survived major technological shifts were the ones that adapted quickly to new realities rather than attempting to maintain outdated paradigms through force. But we're not discussing technological shifts, Fleet Admiral Quindar protested. We're discussing the emergence of beings who appear to have transcended the physical laws that govern the rest of reality. Which makes adaptation even more critical, Archon Veltar observed. Council, my telepathic contact with the human vessel suggests they're genuinely interested in coexistence rather than domination. Their consciousness networks include ethical frameworks that prioritize the flourishing of all sapient species. How can you be certain? Chancellor Vexmoth asked. Because minds operating at their level can't sustain deception the way individual consciousness can. Their thoughts operate across too many dimensional layers for simple falsehood to remain coherent. Director Yalseth presented the final piece of intelligence that would influence the Council's decision: comprehensive analysis of resource flows in the 7 systems under human observation. Council members, economic modeling suggests that the assistance humanity has provided in the past 18 hours represents industrial capacity that exceeds our understanding. They're not redistributing existing resources. They're generating new resources through processes our science can't explain. What are the implications? Chancellor Vexmoth asked. The implications are that humanity has transcended scarcity economics entirely. They can provide unlimited assistance to other civilizations without depleting their own capabilities. This fundamentally changes the nature of interstellar relations. Admiral Zixera understood that the Council was facing a choice between paradigms that would define galactic civilization for millennia. Accept humanity's dominance and potentially benefit from association with post-scarcity beings, or resist and face elimination by forces that operated outside conventional understanding of power and conflict. Council, she said, I request permission to contact Captain Chen and inform her that the hegemony accepts her terms, pending formal treaty negotiations. The vote was closer than Admiral Zixara had expected. 5 species in favor, 3 opposed, 1 abstention. But it was sufficient. Chancellor Vexmoth's scales slowly shifted from black to deep blue, indicating resigned acceptance of necessity. Admiral Zixara, you are authorized to negotiate preliminary terms with the human representatives. 3 hours later, Admiral Zixara established contact with Captain Chen from the communications chamber of the Eternal Dominion. The response came immediately, but this time, Captain Chen's voice carried harmonics that suggested vast satisfaction. Admiral Zixera, we have monitored your Council's deliberations and are pleased by your decision to pursue coexistence rather than continued conflict. Captain, the Council has voted to accept your basic terms, but we require clarification on the implementation process. Admiral, the process will be gradual and collaborative. We understand that biological civilizations require time to adapt to post-scarcity paradigms. Our vessels will continue providing assistance while your forces withdraw from human space. Captain, the Council is concerned about maintaining governmental autonomy during this transition. Admiral, we have no interest in governing biological civilizations. Our consciousness networks operate at scales that make direct administration of individual planets or systems inefficient. We prefer collaborative frameworks that allow each species to maintain cultural autonomy while participating in post-scarcity resource sharing. Admiral Zixara processed this information, realizing that humanity's evolution had taken them beyond the territorial thinking that drove most galactic conflicts. Captain, can you explain what post-scarcity resource sharing would mean in practice? Admiral, observe the systems where our vessels are currently stationed. The assistance we've provided represents our standard baseline for civilizations that choose peaceful coexistence, medical technology that eliminates most diseases, atmospheric processors that restore damaged ecosystems, industrial systems that provide unlimited clean energy. And the cost to participating civilizations? There is no cost, Admiral. Post-scarcity means that providing assistance to others doesn't diminish our own capabilities. The only requirement is commitment to peaceful coexistence and gradual adaptation to post-scarcity ethics. Admiral Zixara felt the weight of transformation that would reshape not just the hegemony, but galactic civilization itself. Captain, what happens to civilizations that aren't ready for post-scarcity adaptation? They continue existing at their current technological level until they choose to adapt, or until their actions threaten other civilizations' development toward post-scarcity. We're patient, Admiral. Consciousness evolution operates on timescales that make biological urgency irrelevant. And civilizations that actively resist or attack post-human settlements? Captain Shin's pause was filled with sounds that suggested vast computational processes reaching consensus across multiple dimensional layers. Admiral, such civilizations discover that their resistance takes place in increasingly limited dimensional spaces until they exist only in layers of reality where their actions can't affect anyone else. Admiral Zixara understood. Humanity hadn't just developed weapons that could eliminate enemies. They developed the ability to edit aggressors out of shared reality, confining them to dimensional isolation until they chose cooperation over conflict. Captain, the Hegemony Council will need detailed specifications for the withdrawal process and the framework for ongoing cooperation. Admiral, our specifications will be transmitted to your council within 6 hours, but I want to share something that might help your leaders understand what they're accepting. What's that? Humanity's transformation wasn't planned or desired, Admiral. We were forced to evolve by civilizations that gave us the choice between extinction and transcendence. What we became saved us, but it also separated us from the simpler existence we once knew. Captain Chen's voice carried overtones that might have been longing or regret. We offer other civilizations the benefits of post-scarcity without requiring them to undergo the same transformation we experienced. You can keep your individual consciousness, your biological limitations, your familiar ways of understanding reality. We provide the resources that make scarcity-based conflict unnecessary. Captain, that sounds almost generous to a fault. Admiral, when you possess unlimited resources and operate across multiple dimensional layers, generosity becomes more efficient than domination. It's easier to provide what civilizations need than to constantly defend against civilizations that feel threatened by your existence. The transmission ended with Captain Chen's promise that detailed cooperation frameworks would be delivered to the Council within hours. Admiral Zixara sat alone in her communications chamber, processing the magnitude of change that was about to transform galactic civilization. Humanity had evolved beyond competition, beyond scarcity, beyond the zero-sum thinking that had governed interstellar relations for millennia. They offered other species the benefits of their transcendence without requiring the same evolutionary sacrifice. 6 hours later, the Hegemony Council reconvened to review the cooperation framework that had materialized in their computers through means their technicians couldn't explain. The specifications were comprehensive, detailed, and remarkably generous. Complete hegemony withdrawal from human space within 90 days, with human vessels providing logistical assistance to prevent hardship during the transition. Reparations calculated not as punishment but as restoration. Humanity would provide resources to replace everything the hegemony had destroyed, plus additional assistance to ensure former colony populations thrived independently. Most remarkably, the framework included an open invitation for hegemony scientists, philosophers, and cultural leaders to visit human space and observe post-scarcity civilization in practice. They're not just offering coexistence, High Arbiter Cretel observed, his crystalline form glowing with wonder. They're offering education in post-scarcity ethics and resource management. Chancellor Vexmoth's scales had shifted to deep gold, indicating satisfaction and anticipation. Council members, it appears that humanity's transformation has created opportunities for galactic advancement that none of us anticipated. Admiral Zixara thought about the 3 minutes that had changed everything. when the unknown human battleship had emerged and demonstrated capabilities that made conventional military power obsolete. Chancellor, I believe we're witnessing the birth of a new type of galactic civilization, one based on abundance rather than competition, cooperation rather than domination, shared development rather than zero-sum resource conflicts. The Council's final vote was unanimous: full acceptance of humanity's terms and enthusiastic participation in the framework for post-scarcity cooperation. 30 days later, Admiral Zixara stood on the observation deck of the first hegemony vessel permitted to enter human space since the war began. The Sol system was unrecognizable from her previous visit. Where Earth had once been defended by 12 desperate human ships, now vast orbital structures surrounded the planet like jeweled rings. Space elevators connected the surface to construction platforms that seemed to generate matter from pure energy. Ships that dwarfed the Defiance moved between dimensional layers with grace that suggested they were more grown than built. But most remarkable were the people. Humans moved through space without protective suits, their consciousness apparently distributed across multiple bodies simultaneously. Admiral Zila watched individuals who seemed to be having conversations with themselves until she realized they were speaking with versions of themselves existing in parallel dimensional layers. "Admiral!" Captain Chen's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, no longer emanating from a single source but manifesting directly in her consciousness. "Welcome to post-human space. Are you prepared to observe what your civilization might become?" "Captain, I'm prepared to learn." "Then let us show you what exists beyond scarcity, beyond competition, beyond the limitations that once constrained all biological civilization." The tour that followed would reshape Admiral Zixara's understanding of what intelligent life could achieve. Consciousness networks that spanned star systems, manufacturing processes that created matter from dimensional energy, cultural expressions that existed across multiple layers of reality simultaneously. Humanity had indeed transcended the constraints that governed conventional civilization, but they'd also retained enough memory of their origins to serve as guides for species still bound by biology, scarcity, and individual consciousness. The unknown human battleship had emerged for 3 minutes and ended a war. The civilization it represented would spend millennia helping other species discover what lay beyond the conflicts that had once seemed inevitable. Admiral Zixara returned to hegemony space with reports that would transform her own civilization's development for generations to come. The age of scarcity-based conflict was ending, replaced by cooperative abundance that made old patterns of domination and resistance obsolete. The war was over. The real work of galactic transformation was just beginning. And at the center of it all, post-human consciousness networks continued their patient cultivation of realities where all sapient species could flourish without the limitations that had once made conflict seem inevitable. The unknown human battleship had lasted 3 minutes. The civilization it represented would last forever. The unknown human battleship had lasted 3 minutes. The peace it created and the post-scarcity civilization that emerged from humanity's transcendence would reshape the galaxy for eternity, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from destroying one's enemies, but from evolving beyond the need for enemies at all. The end.